Fulfillment isn't at your next milestone. In this video, I'm going to talk through the real reason why you don't feel like you're there yet. My name's Cameron Borthwick. I lost my business at 19 years old due to self-sabotage. And then I went and lived with a Buddhist nun for 2 years, diving into everything around meditation, shadow work, and integral psychology. Now I work with established entrepreneurs, helping them match their internal world with the achievement they've already had externally. Okay. Now, if you're successful by every objective measure out here, but you don't feel truly fulfilled, you're probably living in a similar lie that I was, right? That I'll feel it when I hit this milestone. I'll be happy when I become this version of myself. I'll be fulfilled when I reach this income goal. Okay. Now, we have all been there. So after that initial dopamine hit of achieving something, we have that high. We're like, oh, we're really good. And then we kind of go back to our set baseline again. And then what do? We down another coffee and we go for the next goal, the next, I'll be happy when, right? And we just continue the cycle again and again and again. And then what happens? Well, we eventually get a bit frustrated, or we just continue it, being unconscious. And we start exploring, well, what do I really want, right? Well, I want fulfillment. I want happiness. I want these internal peace. Okay. And when we get to this point, we're often met by someone going, well, fulfillment and peace that is internal, right? That comes from you. And that's liberating. That's beautiful. But we've all heard it before. And what do they tell you? Well, how do you become deeply fulfilled? How do you reach real peace? How do you reach happiness? Well, you can do your gratitude journaling. You're going to do your mindset work. You can do your meditations and your cold baths. And you do them. It feels kind of good for a little bit. Pardon me. And then what happens? You go back to the same version of yourself you were before. Right? You do your gratitude journaling and it feels good for about 5-10 minutes, maybe even an hour if you're doing really good. And then you go back to being the same you with the stress, the anxiety, and the unhappiness. So let's break this down. What's actually happening, right? If my problem was stress and anxiety, I want to explore how am I creating that, right? The reason I want to do that is because when I'm tackling it at the symptom level, which is something like gratitude learning or mindset work will do, all I'm doing is getting rid of the symptom for a moment, the anxiety, the stress, okay? But I'm not getting rid of the internal process that created it to begin with. Right? What does that mean? Well, when I'm having a stress and anxiety, it's not just arising magically, right? It's not just, I'm just a stressful person. We may identify with that, but we're just creating that. We're just creating our own stress, our anxiety, our own unhappiness. And we don't realize we are. Through our own stories, our own ways of internalizing the world, right? Maybe things we've taken on, programs we've taken on. And so let's say I explore this, the stress, the anxiety, and I go, how am I internally creating that? And we might find, it'll be different for you, it'll be different for every single person. Well, I took on a program that makes me feel very unsafe, right? I feel kind of in fight or flight mode permanently, right? Maybe I took it on from a family member who acted this way when I was young, right? Which is very suggestible when we're younger. And so now I'm adopting this pattern of fight or flight as stress, anxiety, and unhappiness because I just took it on. Not because it's mine, not because I'm stressed, just I took it on. And so now it's a program that I'm running. And so now, even if we do the symptom level things, we're still just going to come back to the same internal process. So what do we do to create lasting permanent change? Well, we break the internal process. We break the construct that created the problem to begin with. We break the program. And so it's not important to tackle the anxiety, stress, depression, or unhappiness. I don't care about this. It's the structure. If we tackle the structure, we make real change. And this is where we get into real lasting healing territory, right? And it gets better as well, because when we break the internal process of constructs, there's a space for our own authentic version of ourselves to come through, right? So more often than not, when I'm working with someone, I'll break the construct, right? Or help them break it. And what emerges will be themselves, right? You can imagine let's say you took it on when you were 6. What would the version of you that never took that on feel like, right? Maybe you never took on the stress and anxiety. And I'm working with a client and they say, I just feel an emerging peace, right? And that's just their peace, that's them. Or I just feel an emerging joy. Often childlike joy emerges when we break these survival patterns very often. We break these programs. And so when we do that, it's not adding a state experience. We're not going, adopt this loving state or gratitude. We're not forcing it. We're just witnessing what emerges organically when we break the construct. And this is very important because it's always going to be more powerful if it comes organically than if we put something in there. And so what this does is we nurture that and we create real lasting change, right? We get to a point where that peace, that childlike joy that emerged maybe in the session is just permanent, is just what we experience every single day from when we wake up to when we go to bed. Now, what does that really mean for you? What about deep fulfillment that you crave? Removing the stress, anxiety, unhappiness. It's very possible. And it doesn't require hours of meditation or mindset work. It requires breaking the structure, what we call the constructs, that created the symptoms to begin with. And that's the most important insight here. So let's just try another one. I had a client and they came to me and they were work. Probably met many of these people. We call them type A or something like this. And this person, they couldn't rest at all. So we explored a little bit. I said, how are we creating, or how are you creating this work? After a little bit of exploration, we got back to a program that actually came from his mum. And his mum was work as well. And so once we found that, I just invited him just to allow that to go back to her, allow that program just to leave him and go back to her. And this is one way we can break a construct. And then we just witnessed what emerges in that space, right? What emerges when we break the construct. And for him, it was this deep peace. It was just as large as the ocean, right? And we spent the next 50, 60 minutes just nurturing and celebrating that. Really just allowing that to deepen, allowing that to grow. Right? This organic version of himself that he described as peace, as large as the ocean. And when we did that, he left the session and he was just feeling amazing. And we connected a week later. And one of the problems he'd been experiencing at the beginning was that work was getting in the way of his relationship, his marriage. Of course, it was getting in the way of his actual health and his experience of life. And it was also getting in the way of his business, because even though he was very successful, he was often micromanaging people and often being very, very tough on people that he was working with, right? And often people were being a little bit unhappy or not working to the highest capacity. And he knew this, he just couldn't stop it. And so we met a month and we met 6 months, but we're talking about, a week and 6 months. So at the week, he'd been doing his nurturing practice that we spoke about, and he'd just been experiencing it every single day, right? This deep peace every single day. Wasn't going Sometimes it was stronger and sometimes it was a little bit weaker, but it was just solidifying more and more, deepening more and more, growing more and more every single day. And he just told me that it was a wonderful thing to wake up to. And it was a wonderful thing to live from, or a wonderful state to live from. And then we explored a little bit more. And he told me that his relationship with his wife started to be an emerging, deeper connection. Because he wasn't so focused, he wasn't so, work. He's still very focused, but he wasn't so anxious. He was able to really connect with her. And when he told me that in work, he'd felt a lot more relaxed. And it was a little bit weird for him at first, but things seemed to be working out really well. And most importantly, he was living in a really beautiful way and really enjoying life, living from his state. Now, we then met at 6 months, right? And at 6 months, we'd been continuing our work together and we upgraded other things. We did some more shadow work, but this emerging piece had stayed until the 6-month mark. It'd been really permanent, really lasting change. And he reported a few more things. The relationship with his wife had continued to deepen, had really not only stayed, but had really continued to grow. And then he told me that his employees, who didn't know about any of his work, were actually commenting that he's like a new person and that they really enjoy the person he is and that he used to be so tough and a little bit of a tyrant, right? And they felt comfortable and safe to tell him this now. And most importantly, they were actually being more effective, right? They were actually, he runs sales teams, they were getting more sales, they were being more effective in their work. And because of that, he was making more money, the business was making more money. But most importantly, because these things are amazing, external metric, they really give us an insight into the objective reality of the change, right? Amazing with relationship, amazing with business. But what was most important is he got to live every day in deep peace. And he got to really enjoy his life. And he told me that the difference between previously with the old pattern and now with his just emerging peace as wide as the ocean was he just deeply enjoyed life. He deeply felt like himself. And, he had done some spiritual stuff before this, a lot of meditation. But he felt like now it was integrated in who he was and how he showed up in the world. He didn't have to choose between being deeply connected spiritually and thriving in the business. He could have both. And at the core, that's what this is about. We don't have to add fulfillment, add happiness, right? We just remove the programs that created it to begin with. We allow our organic, authentic version of ourselves to come through, our natural peace, our natural joy, our natural wonder. And I want to invite you to play with that this week. What's it like to explore who you are beyond the patterns you might have taken on? And I'll be deeply curious to hear what you find when you do this exploration. The version of you that you might be beyond the patterns that were given to you. Good luck, my friends. Bye for now.